Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. There's a very old joke that tells the story of a man who met his pastor in a grocery store. The pastor commented that he had never seen the man attending worship. "Well, Pastor," the man said, "you won't see me there. You see, the first time I went, they threw water on me, and the second time I came, they threw rice at me." The pastor replied, "And I suppose the next time you come, they will throw dirt on you." The more I think about it, that's at best only mildly amusing. The fact is, the church has an important role in our lives, and these milestones of life are especially important times. This past Sunday was All Saints Sunday, and on that day we remember those who have died since November 1st, the year before. In love and grace, God has made them saints. One way to think about this is that they have left the church militant, the church actively at work in a sinful world, and now have entered the church triumphant, with Christ forever. This week I plan to walk us through the funeral liturgy, hopefully to bring to our awareness not only why we do certain things, but how meaningful they are meant to be. Deaths and funerals are difficult times for many. When a loved one dies, we feel the pain of their loss and we struggle with our grief. The funeral service we use is intended to help with that. The role of the funeral service is to affirm the reality of death and to emphasize the victory of the resurrection, to give comfort to those who are bereaved, and to restore the hope we have in Christ. We don't shy away from the reality and pain of death, and acknowledging that up front helps loved ones face and deal with a death. We also look beyond the death to what Christ has done and is doing for the one who has died and for us. You have probably never noticed, but in our hymnal there's an introduction before the funeral service. Few of us have probably ever read it, but perhaps we all should. It says, "At a person's death, the church shares the grief of those who mourn and remembers the brevity of life on earth. At the funeral, we give voice to sorrow, thank God for our loved one, and entrust this companion of ours into the hands of God. Trusting in God's promise in baptism that we are claimed by Christ forever, we rest in the sure hope of the resurrection. When the church gathers to mark the end of life, Christ crucified and risen is the witness of worship, the strength of mutual consolation, and the hope of healing." Perhaps that puts things in a new perspective for us. I think that so often we go to funerals thinking we are going to celebrate someone's life. And what this introduction reminds us of is that a funeral is really about Christ and what Christ has done. When we have a funeral here at Redeemer, the cover of our bulletin announces the funeral worship celebrating the life and new life of the person who died. In that way, we are pointing to the value of the life of the person and that he lived among us, and even more, pointing to the new life that the person has with God. There are a few more general things to talk about before we really dig in. It's important that funerals for a believer happen in the sanctuary. That's the appropriate place for a funeral for one of God's children, and the appropriate place for the family of God to gather for this worship. And notice I keep calling it a funeral worship. When we gather for funerals, as I've said, it's not about the person. Funerals are about God and God's love and grace, so they are worship services. You may have also noticed that in a funeral, the Paschal candle or Christ candle is lit and put near the remains. This candle is lit at special times to remind us of the unique work of Christ to save us. And that's a powerful reminder at funerals. There's a small bit of terminology we need to consider as well. We tend to call the box containing the remains a casket, but that's really not accurate. The word casket actually means a box holding a treasure. We use it to refer to someone's coffin, and we do so in order to say that the person who died was someone we treasured. So that's a beginning. I hope you will join me this week as we walk through the liturgy for a funeral and find the comfort, hope, and assurance that is offered. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.